Well, the New Jerusalem was seen coming down from God out of heaven, and this New Jerusalem, I believe, is what the Bible's saying gets attacked, which is Revelation chapter 20 verse 8. In verse 4, you know, they behead the Christians and the false prophet, which ISIS has been doing of late, and of course the Romans used to do it, behead the Christians. And the church gets surrounded, it says, by Gog and Magog, and they're the kingdoms of the north, and Russia and that, and chief prince of Rosh and Tubal. Rosh is word for Russia there. And all these nations, apparently the planet Earth, attack the Christian church, and they go on the four corners of the earth. Now the Bible talks about the four winds as well as the four corners, okay? Now, when Jesus said, he will send the angels to the four corners of the earth to gather the elect, you know, the believers, the saints, the same ones who were attacked, it doesn't say that they would attack the Jews. It says they attacked the saints. Apostle Paul doesn't write to the Jews at Corinth, you know, he writes to the saints at Corinth, you know. It's the saints at Galatia. The point is, if that's the case, that God sends and God guides the church and protects them, and he calls them his saints, and the Old Testament were, of course, the Jews were the saints, and the New Testament, the Christians are the saints, and they are the ones who get attacked. In verse 8 of chapter 20 of Revelation, verse 9, and the war, which is Armageddon, is this surrounding of the Christian church, the powers of the Christians being taken away at the end of the world. Why would God allow the world to carry on if the Bible is no longer being preached? Now God would also send strong delusion, that is, allow strong delusion and lying wonders, that they all might be damned who believed not the gospel, but had pleasures in unrighteousness. So the gospel, which is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, and we've been kept by the power of God, like a keep, like in a castle, you know. We are kept by the power of God through faith and the salvation to everyone who believes. This power of God and this gospel, which is able to save to the utmost everyone who believes, Jesus said will be preached as a witness in all the world, then the end will come. In Daniel we read that the saints, the man of sin and all that would appear. The saints would be attacked and would have their powers attacked, and it talks about that, Daniel chapter 11, chapter 12 around there. But it also tells us, okay, that God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom in Daniel chapter 2 and that, and that the stone which smashed all the kingdoms of this earth was God's kingdom. It's the gospel, which is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, is what is the kingdom of hearts which Jesus came to set in this world. It wasn't a kingdom of you know, kind of buildings. It was nothing like that. It wasn't lands, territory. You see, the Jewish people to this day, they've got land, and it becomes like a power base on the earth. And you've got you know, buildings. You've got the land which you sustain yourself from. But the kingdom Jesus set up wasn't of this world. It was a kingdom in the heart of people, in the mind, so that we're just passing through like pilgrims on the earth, and we're spending the night at the inn type thing. We don't bring anything to the world, we take nothing away with us. And this kingdom is the kingdom of God saying, love your neighbours yourself, you know, pay your taxes to whom taxes are due. It's the kingdom of righteousness and peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost, and to follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. It's a kingdom which rules by the power of love from the everlasting God in the hearts and minds of all who will believe. And this belief is not compelled, and this compulsion to love is not compelled. It's a free love. As God freely bestows it on us, so we freely give to others. And Jesus freely of his own will came into the world, died on a cross, a cruel death, as was predicted from the Old Testament, suffered in the place of sinners so that he could become our advocate, our lawyer with God the Father, and that the satisfaction he would get from seeing so many saved on the earth, for the joy which was set before him, it says he endured the cross, despised the shame. And Jesus knew that he would win the hearts and minds of men, because he said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. And as of course Moses lifted up the serpent on the stick as a sign to save the people when the serpents were biting them in the desert, in the wilderness there, so they were all saved and healed in the desert when the serpents bit them, because they looked up to that serpent on a pole. But Jesus died on the cross, and the serpent which bit him there was a prediction that the serpent would bite him, Genesis chapter 3, and that this would be a biting of his heel. But it says that Jesus would crush the head of the serpent, the prophecy given there. And the serpent, if you like, to look up to on the pole, was representing Jesus, who died on the cross. And they all looked and were healed, and those who looked at Jesus get healed by the power of God, because their sins are forgiven them, and they become a new person, and they become born again. Their heart, which once was ruled by their own selfish desires, and it becomes a new heart, so that it gets changed. And before they would want to do evil, want to do sinful things, want to follow the flesh and the course of the world. But when you get a brand new heart change, they become a new person, and old things are passed away, all things become new. And this is what Jesus has shown us, that we have to become born again, become a new person, so that old things are gone, they passed away, all things become new. And we need to know that the new kingdom which God's going to set up when he destroys this earth and he changes it or whatever, it says the new everlasting kingdom being brought in will be a kingdom where there's godliness and righteousness, because it says the elements shall melt with fervent heat, and we which are alive and remain, there's another verse it says, shall be caught up to heaven, and the angels shall be sent to the four winds to gather God's elect. There are 4 jet streams around the world, and it's amazing. Jesus said the 4 winds, you know, so biblically correct, so scientifically correct, the Bible. And what I'm saying is this, that God who sits on a circle of the earth, it says in the Psalms, shall laugh them to scorn. The Bible always said the earth was round. It talks about the life being in the blood and all that in the Bible. You know, everything is so scientifically accurate, there's no inaccuracies there. And this Jesus, who came into the world and shed his blood and died in the place of sinners, he leads his church, and it tells us to preach the gospel to all nations, making disciples of people, and that baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and he's with us all the way to the end. And this same Jesus said that he would come in a manner, and such as like a thief in the night, when nobody's watching. And that's what's happening. People are not watching. They're not watching for their souls. If you look at all the internet views on the internet, you know, they've all gone after these, you know, videos like pop music and, you know, that type of thing. But you see very little of the gospel being looked at, you know. It's a song, isn't it? It says the ships, the big ships, they don't come this way anymore, and Jesus is a lighthouse. The thing is, Jesus said that the church would have its powers attacked, because he told John that this Revelation, book of Revelation, is for a time hereafter. It was not for the early church, it's for the time after John. John's speaking about 93 AD. and this is quite late on. So the book of Revelations for us is for the end time church. So when the Bible teaches us to you know, watch for the signs, and Armageddon is part of this being attacked, the Christian church, and we need to watch the signs, look for, you know, Jesus said the sea waves were raw, and he said that there would be a time at the end of the world, after the Jews repossessed Jerusalem, where men's hearts would fail them for fear for those things which come upon the earth, and tornadoes and hurricanes and all manner of super typhoons, earthquakes, and we need to be watching and being ready for a time, because Jesus said that he would come in a time when people weren't watching, like now, like today. You don't see people watching for the end of the world. There's not that many Christians preaching on the subject. There's not that many videos on it. And when they do talk about Armageddon, it's so crazy. They think that the whole world is going to fight in a little valley called Megiddo, a tiny little valley, and that the blood would be up to the horses' reins and whatnots. How foolish and how stupid. As if the world would fight battle in one small valley. I mean, how ridiculous. In the First World War they may have fought in trenches and done silly things. These days it's rockets and bombs and huge blasts from nuclear. Load of nonsense to understand the Bible that way, but we have to accept that some people's views are that way. That's not the Armageddon we're looking at. The Armageddon is the Christian church, which has laws made against it, and their powers get to be attacked, and their witness starts to be restricted, and we see that in all around the world, you know, Christians being attacked and that, beheadings, and you know, people being put in jail and have their properties taken away, all sorts of bad things going on. But these things Jesus said would happen. The early church suffered joyfully the spoiling of their goods. They lost their houses and their lands. They were driven around, and they were living in sheepskins and goat skins and bear skins even, and living in rocks and caves and dens of the earth, as the Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews, and that they were persecuted. Some were sawn asunder. In the Old Testament they used to cut them in half. It says David laid them under the saws, an eye for an eye, a sowing for a sowing. Terrible things the early church had, the saints in the Old Testament and even the New Testament. They were burned alive, they had pitch put over them and lit up as torches, and all sorts of things, beheadings and everything even then. It's always gone on, these persecutions. But what we need to watch for is what Jesus said, the saints' powers, and he talks about Daniel about that. Now, when the early church listened to what Jesus said about the old Jerusalem in 70 AD, he said, when you see it surrounded by armies, you know, flee to the rocks and the mountains and that. He gave them a warning, you know. It was a prophecy given by Daniel, and it said, when you see the abomination, desolation, standing where it ought not, flee to the rocks and mountains and such like. Titus came and you know, so they fled to the rocks and mountains and were saved, the Christians. But the Jews didn't believe Jesus. They didn't accept him as a prophet. They didn't accept him as the Son of God. They didn't accept him as come into the world sent by God. And they perished and died. They rebelled against Rome, and you got those coins and everything in 67 AD they minted and printed. And the rebellion was crushed by the Romans, because Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and they didn't give respect to Caesar. They didn't give money to Caesar, they withheld it, they rebelled, they attacked and murdered the Romans, and then of course destruction came upon them, and of course they murdered Jesus as well, the evil scribes and Pharisees and all that. And this is what we're saying. So anyway, the thing is that Christians were delivered in that Jerusalem, and the Christians will be delivered when they're surrounded in the final New Jerusalem, when it's being attacked, the Christian church, by the armies of this world through Gog and Magog, which is communistic socialisms and all the evil religions which attack the Christian faith. They are the false prophets, and these people will perish. Anyway, just pointing out that better go, because the rain's coming now. Yeah, I'll try it under here. I don't think that'll work. So, what was I going to finish off? The point I was going to make. So, anyway, that's right, the rockets are part of Armageddon as well, and aeroplanes in chapter 9 of Revelation, book of Revelation, and it says that these rockets would come over and they would blast and blow from the east. The kings of the east being prepared. It says Armageddon would be this part of it would be this aeroplanes, and it says they spat out fire, brimstone and smoke, and they came over and they attacked the basically the New Jerusalem, which is God's church. Okay, but even the Jerusalem on earth now to this day should have rockets to propel and go against North Korea's threat, because it says it came from the east, the kings of the east being prepared, the way of the kings of the east, and that border, which is the border of Israel, which is the river Euphrates, it says it dried up. So that tells me that the armies are going to come through easily. How do they do it? Like aeroplanes, rockets. We need to be prepared. Get rockets in place. Look after these places on the earth as well, because it says 200 million died. Do you know what? 200 million were involved in that. Do you know what? 129 million have already died. 129 million in the last 100 years. For 5 months this was to go on. This attack, which is 150 days. And 1 day is a year. So there you have it. 150 days is a year. And they were attacked. And this is what I'm talking about. 150 days is 150 years. It's been over 100 years now since the First World War, when they had aeroplanes. They spat out fire, brimstone and smoke, this creature which came out of the pit. And this is what I'm trying to say. So watch, be ready. Be ready for the end of the world. Be ready for the signs which Jesus tells us about. He's going to set up a new earth and a new heaven wherein dwells righteousness. Here comes the hail, I think. Oh, yeah. So, end of the sermon now, I think. I better go. Where's that button gone?